Welcome. Today we'll be going over variables, data types, operators, syntax, and casting. Let's first start out with Python syntax. Before we start coding, let's talk about the syntax. Syntax is like grammar when it comes to programming. It's like the spelling rules. Here are a few things you have to keep in mind. Indentations. Python uses indentations like space and tabs to define different blocks of code. Unlike other languages that might have a bracket, Python just uses indentations. Python is also very case sensitive, which means that let's say use name and then small name. These two are different things. And finally, many parts of Python uses a colon. Like this, not semicolon, just a colon. Now let's start printing. Let's print out our first thing, print hello world. And you print this, hello world. We can use print to get results in the console. In this video, we'll be using print to show that something has happened. There's also commenting. Use a hashtag and you can comment. This prints hello world. Now, let's say I want to comment out this entire line of code. Well, I can do this, or I can use quotation marks. Anything in between these quotation marks will be commented out. So I run the code, nothing happens. Now we'll be going over variables. Variable is a container for storing data. It is important to label your value for the future. Let's first start out by making a variable called age. Now age, let's say I'm 21. Well, then this stores 21. So if I print age, it will print out 21. Very, very cool. Now, let's talk about data types. So we know printing and we know variables, but there's no point in using variables if you don't know data types. Data types are very, very important. And there are 4 basic data types that you should learn as a beginner. Integers, floats, strings, and booleans. These are the 4 most common ones, but you could use other data types like lists, dictionaries, and tuples, but we will not be going over them today. This is an example. Age is an example of an integer. And let's say I would put in my height. Let's say I am 5 foot and 5.8 feet, let's say. And then we're going to print height. (21) and 28.8, 5.8. This is an example of an integer. This is an example of a float. Now, if you see, the difference between these two is that this has a decimal. Let's say I did this. Now this age is also a float. Why? Because it's a decimal. Now let's say I made this line of code and I want it for next year. Well, I can do +1 and let's say I grow an extra inch or two, or I grow this much. You can get the results as you see. 2.2 + 1, 2.89999. Basically the same thing. This is an operator, which we'll be going over later. Now let's go over a string. Let's say you have a name. My name is Kevin. A string is a sequence of characters enclosed by quotations. This is the definition. You can use strings to store names, messages, or other kinds of text. You can combine strings by using an operator like addition. So let's say print, and I want to print my name is name. When I print this, my name is Kevin. Make sure I have space. My name is Kevin. And finally, there's booleans. Booleans are true and false values. They're logic operators, basically. So let's say I'll put this. Is raining? Well, as of right now, it's not raining, so false. Is night? Well, it is a night, so true. This is a boolean. Now let's go over operators. Operators are used to perform actions in your data. We'll be going over arithmetic, comparison, and logical operators. So let's use two basic variables. X equals 10, y equals 5. Now when it comes to variables, you should probably name them something smart. There's a ton of variable naming conventions, but to make it easy, we'll just be using plus 10 and 5. So the first one is the addition one. This just adds. It adds x and y, so it adds 5 and 4. 5 and 10. Now you can also assign this to a variable. Z equals x plus y. And all this does is it adds 15. There's also minus. This is subtraction. All this does is that it subtracts your two values. Then there's multiply. This multiplies your two value. So 5 times 10 is 50. And then we have x divided by y, division. This divides it. 10 divided by 5 is 2. And then there's modulus. X modulus y. And all this does is it gets the remainder. So 10 divided by 5 is 2, and it has no remainder, so the answer would be 0. And then there's print, final one. X, 2 stars, y, this is power. So x, 10 to the power of 5. And if we print this, you'll get exactly what I've been saying. These operators use basic math, addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, and more. There's also comparison. So let's say I have these two variables and I want to find which one's bigger. Well, I would print A greater than B. This is greater than. You can't print it. Don't mind what I'm doing. So you can't really do anything with this operator unless you use an if statement, but we will not be going over that today. We'll just be going over what this is. So A over B is if A is over than B, greater than B. A less than B, less than. And then this is very interesting. A equals B. This is equal to. Make sure when you use this, you use two equal signs. This is very important because one equal sign does something completely different. One equal sign changes the value. So let's say I want to do Z equals A plus B. Well, as you can see, Z are these two things combined. Equals is a logical operator. Equals is assigning a value. And then there's A exclamation mark equals B. And this is not equal to. comparison operators turn true and false based on if the condition is met. And finally, there is logical operators, which is just true and false. Well, I will not be going over them because they're very basic and you rarely use them in Python that I've seen so far. But basically, logical operators are to combine booleans and values and return a true or false value based on if it's true or not. So let's say if I had I'll go over them. Is raining is false. Make sure you capitalize it. Is night equals true. Let's say you print is raining and is night, and if you print it, false. The reason is because one of them is false, one of them is true, so it prints out false. Which means that if you use or, you get true. So if one of these is true, it will print out true. And let's say I use not, it's false. It reverses the value. So it's true, it's false. So basically, not is, it prints out the reverse. This is true, it prints out false. Or is if one of them is true, and is if both of them are true. And then finally, let's go over casting. Now, let's say you have your age. And you want to print your age. You'll print my age is, comma, plus age. Now, let's say we run this. Wow, it says string, not integer. This means that this is a string, this is an integer. You can't add an integer into a string. So what you do is you cast it. Now casting is basically converting the data type into any other data type. So let's say you want to cast an integer into a string, use str brackets, and my age is 21. Now let's say you want to turn an integer into a float. Your age is 21, and you want to print, or you want to turn into a float. So print float age 2.1. Yeah. So if you want to turn let's say you want to turn a float into an integer, 2.1 int 2, and it also rounds 2. It always rounds down. So 2.8, 2, 2.9, 2, 3.1, 3. So keep in mind when you cast something into an integer. Let's say you cast a float into an integer, it always rounds down. So in conclusion, variables store data, and there are three data types we went over: integers, floats, strings, and booleans. We use operators in math, comparing values and applying logic. We learn basic syntax, commenting, and finally we learn how to cast values. Thank you.